The political fight over superannuation is about to heat up as we count down to the next federal election. The points of difference between what Labor wants to do with super versus what One Nation and the Coalition are proposing is becoming rather stark. Anthony Albanese thinks that superannuation is a national asset and has plans to try to dragoon it into investments that the government think are of national importance. That could mean high-speed rail links up and down the East Coast, or any other schemes that the whim of the government takes an interest in. On the other side of the spectrum, the One Nation Party, as well as the Coalition, and they've taken this policy to the last two elections, wants to find a way to allow superannuation to be accessed by first homeowners or first home buyers to help them get into the property market. This is a starkly different approach to how your super should be used. Now let's be abundantly clear about one thing. Neither of the political parties in this stoush, including One Nation, are trying to take your superannuation. This isn't a bid to abolish compulsory superannuation. This isn't some veiled attempt by the government in Labor's case to actually take your super for their own benefit. It's about investment decisions and whether they should be done at a macro level in what is called the national interest by a government, or at a micro level, whether they should be allowed to help an individual who owns their super to invest it in a property that they can purchase to get into the home ownership market. But be clear about this, scare campaigns will abound relentlessly between now and the next election, and we've already seen it with the Treasurer Jim Chalmers labelling what Pauline Hanson put forward in terms of accessing one super to buy a home as the death and the end of compulsory superannuation. That is absolute rubbish. It's one of those classic political scare campaigns that doesn't bear any reality or similarity to the truth. I've been a long-term advocate for compulsory superannuation. Frankly, without it, I don't think I would have saved the amount of money that I've got in my super account, which is pledged for my retirement. And I suspect many Australians are in the same boat. Paul Keating, when he introduced compulsory superannuation while Prime Minister, did a wonderful thing for this country, and it has put us in a position where fiscally we are helping to self-fund as individuals the retirement of the nation, rather than the burden being unnecessarily put on the aged care pension, as was always previously the case. But the value of compulsory superannuation doesn't mean that we can't have a legitimate debate in this country about how it might be invested in different ways, whether we're talking about Anthony Albanese's version or the version that Pauline Hanson and the Coalition are talking about, which would allow individuals access to the money that they have saved out of their working funds into compulsory superannuation. When superannuation was first brought in, we were talking about a pretty paltry figure, 3% of one's working wage. That is now up to 12%, and advocates say that it needs to go even higher than that to have the replacement factor for when somebody transitions from work to retirement to live on the kind of income that they would expect to be able to sustain their lifestyle. Now, what are the ways that that can best be achieved? That's where this debate gets really interesting. And I want to start by going into the model that the Liberal Party have talked about for a couple of electoral cycles, and now Pauline Hanson and One Nation are spruiking as well. There's not an enormous amount of meat on the policy bones of what Pauline Hanson has put forward, but the principles appear to be this. If you can't fund your way into a first home owning situation, you might have $50,000 or $100,000 already in your super account. You can take to a cap an amount of that out and use it towards your home. Now, in that situation, you can then be able to afford the mortgage more cheaply, and you can perhaps be able to afford a deposit that you otherwise might not have been able to save for. But if you ever sell that property, or if your financial situation improves in the years or decades ahead, that money would go back into your super with the next purchase of your property. In the situation where it's stayed in the family home for longer, well, it's still not a bad investment from a superannuation perspective because of the capital growth that property has historically received in this country. You wouldn't be getting rent on top of that because obviously there's no benefit to the individuals if they have to then pay rent to the super fund, but the capital investment alone, estimates suggest, might be enough to make it relatively comparable as an asset class in a superannuation portfolio. It's not hard to imagine why many Australians might think this is a pretty good idea. If you're looking at your super deposit and it's got somewhere in the order of $50, $100 or perhaps even $150,000 in it, but you can't as a lower income earner save enough for a deposit to own a home, and you're watching house prices continue to rise rapidly and make it harder and harder for you to get into the market, it's not hard in that situation to see why some Australians would think, well, hang on, I earned the funds through my working life that have gone into that compulsory super. Why can't I make it directly work for me to get into my first home? Part of the strategy around retirement is the value of home ownership. The government's own research tells us that that is an important pillar in a safe and comfortable financial retirement. So if you can get people into homes earlier, they stop paying rent, which of course we know is dead money. They're still getting the capital gain into their super of that property. And most importantly, from the perspective of the Coalition and One Nation, you are giving people choice. Choice about money that they have earned, which has gone into compulsory superannuation. That doesn't mean that compulsory super's not a good thing or that it's been eroded. It means that it's becoming a little more flexible in the modern world we live in, where house prices are where they are. Frankly, I have more concerns about the model that Labor and Anthony Albanese are looking at. This idea that they can decide as a government where superannuation funds are invested should be disturbing to anyone with money in super, because Australia has $4.5 trillion of superannuation. That's one of the highest numbers in the world for a relatively small middle power like Australia with its population of 28 million. Why do I say it's disturbing? Because the whole point of investing in superannuation is twofold. One, if you choose to, you can pick the types of investments that you want in a self-managed super fund. And two, if you leave it to big super to make those decisions, as most of us do, then it makes those decisions in your best interests, not in the interests of the government. Not because the government has particular projects that might turn out to be white elephants that it's struggling for investment dollars to invest in. Doesn't that tell you something? If they can't find private investors to invest in certain schemes, why on earth would people want their super to go into those schemes? It's risky, it's not your choice, and frankly, the whim of the government as the decider of what's a best investment or not, well, do we really trust them? So as we count down to the next election, there's gonna be scare campaigns on all sides. There's going to be cries, like we've already heard from the callow comments of the Treasurer, that this is the death of superannuation, that the Coalition, or indeed now Pauline Hanson and One Nation, want to rip away your super and do an end to compulsory super. That's garbage. They're simply suggesting to give you choice and opportunity, and even then in very restricted ways. We're talking about first homeowners, not the rest of society, in ways that can get you into a home faster and earlier, which has its own financial benefits, as well obviously as lifestyle benefits. On the other side, Labor's scheme, I've expressed concerns that I have with it. No doubt the scare campaign on that front will be running pretty hard too amongst the opposition and One Nation. But just bear this in mind, at the end of the day, superannuation accounts are owned by those who have worked for the proceeds that go in it. Big super might not like being able to disaggregate that to a certain extent, including home ownership, but that doesn't make it wrong. That's their self-interest that's guiding in that direction, because it would mean potentially a breakup of their dominance in super investing. It's your money, you have some choice about what to do with it. If that choice opens up even further to things like helping you get in a home sooner for the first time, is that really such a bad thing?